Hi, everyone. How you doing tonight? Welcome. My name's Doug Hagan. I'm chair of the Palo Alto Library Advisory Commission. And on behalf of the entire LAC, actually, one of our fellow members, Bob, is here. Hi, Bob. Say hello. I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us tonight. And we wanted to also thank our amazing director, Monique, and our incredible staff for organizing this event. It's an event that I guess grew out of discussions that the Library Advisory Commission was having with Monique and at our meetings, really around strategic questions and really how best for Palo Alto's libraries to serve our community and what the future of our libraries in Palo Alto might look like. And those questions really came up thanks to an investment cycle that we went through over a number of years. I'm sure you're all aware of and hopefully experienced with our new revitalized libraries. So, thanks to the City Council, the Palo Alto Library Foundation, as well as the FOPAL, Friends of Palo Alto Libraries, we had this question of what the future might look like. And I think based on those investments, as well as the work of staff and a lot of grant writing and grants, we're actually already experiencing the future of libraries here today in Palo Alto. Certainly relative to a lot of other library systems in the country, we're very fortunate. But this being Silicon Valley, that of course isn't good enough. So we're here tonight really to have a discussion and get some great information and some new perspectives on what the future of libraries might look like and how that might affect Palo Alto. So I'd like to thank our panelists and moderator for joining us tonight and look forward to learning more about the future of libraries, and hand it to Monique. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This is quite a nice event, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the speakers as much as I'm predicting we all will. I do also want to thank the Commission and the Friends of the Palo Alto Library. The Friends support nearly all of our programming, so if you're ever able to stop and thank them all, I hope that you'll do that. I do also want to mention that after this event, we are hosting a community conversation at the library at Rinconada on October 14th. There's more information on the little table out by the back door. So I hope you'll take the flyer, and I hope you'll join us to talk about the library going forward. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing 3 different speakers. Those of you who have lived in Palo Alto probably are familiar with our first speaker, Sandra Hirsch. Sandy has in the past been the chair of the Library Advisory Commission, and Dr. Hirsch is also the director and the professor of the School of Information at San Jose State University. You may also notice that she's not here. Sandy is in Japan right now working, and she has recorded for us a presentation that will highlight why or how library schools are preparing students for the future.
As a longtime resident of Palo Alto.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have waited. So let me read the introduction, please. So before she became director at San Jose State, she worked in Silicon Valley in R&D and consumer product development for more than a decade at major technology companies such as Hewlett-Packard Labs, Microsoft, and LinkedIn. She's held a number of leadership roles in professional associations, having served as the president of the Association for Information Science and Technology, and she's edited a foundational library and information science textbook Information Services Today, An Introduction, which was published by Rowman and Littlefield in 2015. She co-founded and co-chairs the Global Virtual Library 2.0 Conference Series, which hosts 3 virtual mini-conferences each year. She has been an active advocate for Palo Alto libraries for many years as a member and chair of the LAC that worked on the long-term vision for Palo Alto libraries. All of that work resulted in the currently renovated and rebuilt facilities. And during that time, she was also a member of the Library Bond Oversight Committee. She holds both a bachelor's degree and PhD from UCLA and a master's in library and information science from the University of Michigan. All right, so I'm gonna turn this off.
As a longtime resident of Palo Alto and as someone who cares deeply about Palo Alto libraries, I am excited to talk with you today about my perspective about where libraries are headed and about how schools of information are preparing future information professionals to be forward-thinking contributors and to work in communities like Palo Alto. In his report, Confronting the Future, Roger Levian addressed the major issues facing libraries in the future and provided a framework of 4 dimensions for envisioning the future of library and information science services. He showed how libraries are moving along a continuum from the past to the future, with most libraries somewhere between each of these dimensions, still offering some forms from both ends of the spectrum. For example, you can see here how he describes libraries of the past as focusing on the individual user and libraries of the future becoming a hub for community interaction and group work. I think this framework is useful in identifying both the connection of libraries of the past to those of the future. While there are many ways that libraries are serving as community partners, I have selected 3 ways to illustrate how libraries are transforming and will continue to evolve in the future to be relevant to their communities, specifically by providing and supporting collaborative learning experiences, environments for exploration and play, and patron content creation. When appropriate, I'm highlighting some specific examples of my school's alumni in the local area who are partnering and impacting their communities. First, libraries are providing collaborative learning experiences. Libraries are clearly no longer a place to be seen and not heard, with many providing collaborative learning environments and experiences. David Lankeys, who is the author of The Atlas of the New Librarianship, notes, a library should be a participatory platform that allows a community to share passions, expertise, and resources. He further acknowledges that knowledge is created through conversations. For example, at Chattanooga Public Library, the library offers many of its computer workshops as collaborative co-learning classes where participants are encouraged to help out one another without expecting the librarian to be the expert. The result is the creation of a social and learning environment in the library. Second, libraries are providing an environment of exploration and play to learn new technologies. Whoever comes through the library's doors is there to seek knowledge or explore a new topic. Librarians are working to provide every user with an environment conducive to that end, with libraries providing access to a range of technology for exploration, such as computers, e-readers, gaming stations, music recording stations, 3D printers, and other new and emerging technologies. I want to highlight 2 great examples of how libraries are providing environments for exploration for learning new technologies. Both involve alumni from my school, and if you're interested, you can watch the short videos, just 2 to 3 minutes each later. At the Santa Clara City Library, one of our alumni has developed a drone movie making program where youth get to fly drones with cameras and then edit the footage to make a movie. This allows them to get experience with new technology, build STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and math skills, and try something new like playing with drones. Another example is the Make Her program at the Sunnyvale Public Library. One of our school's alumni started this innovative program to give girls ages 8 through 12 and their moms the opportunity to work side by side, applying their creativity and using existing tools and inventing new ones. Girls and their mothers carry out project-based, hands-on STEM learning in a series of 2-hour workshops. I think these 2 examples are really exciting and showcase the innovative ways that libraries are engaging with their communities. Third, libraries are helping patrons to create content. While in the past, libraries were primarily just places for patrons to read and access published information, libraries are now taking a more active role in the creation of new knowledge. Libraries are natural places to connect learning, creativity, and knowledge production. Some examples include coding hackathons, innovation labs, and makerspaces. Libraries are also going out into the community to engage in content creation with patrons. The San Jose Public Library recently launched the Maker Spaceship, which is an innovative mobile workshop. The goal is to overcome access barriers in San Jose and to foster creative ideas, connect people with technology, and encourage problem solving, collaboration, and discovery. One of our school's alumni helped lead the effort to launch this exciting project. We have a video of this too that you can watch if you want. Library and information science education is the key ingredient for providing and sustaining library professionals who are qualified to meet the demands of libraries today and who are prepared for the community-driven technological transformation of the future. Library and information science education has a strong ear to the industry. We are watching hiring trends to identify the current needs of libraries. We are watching the industry reports of emerging technologies and how they will impact education, our communities, and our libraries. And we hire experts who are our faculty who are experts in library applications, user behaviors, and emerging technologies, so we can build curriculum and professional development opportunities that meet the immediate and future needs of libraries. In my book, Information Services Today, An Introduction, a foundational textbook for the field of library and information science, I had 40 leading information leaders contribute to this book. One of the key themes that emerged is the importance of technology in the field of library and information science. I observed, in addition to maintaining the integrity of information stored, accessed, and used, information professionals today must also be technologically knowledgeable and skilled in emerging technologies and their myriad of uses. It's important for libraries and the professionals who work in them to always be looking ahead at the technologies that are coming up and how they will impact our communities. Today's library and information science students are getting a broad foundation of knowledge to prepare them for a range of roles both in libraries and other information environments. At our school, the foundation courses focus on information communities, information retrieval and systems design, information professions, and research methods. We also provide an extensive array of electives to prepare students for a wide range of career opportunities that can be applied in different environments. Here are just a few of the kinds of elective courses that students at San Jose State University School of Information can take. They range from technology courses like Scratch, cybersecurity, and the emerging future, to user experience and design thinking, to instructional and information literacy courses. As I conclude, I want to leave you today with a few takeaways from this presentation. First, libraries need to embrace change and technology in our field and continue to transform in response. Second, the library and information science field is evolving and needs to continue to evolve. I shared with you a number of trends and examples of what libraries are doing. Third, library and information science education is changing. Is at the forefront of preparing new librarians to be leaders in the information field and in their communities like Palo Alto. In sum, we have no way to predict the future, but libraries can prepare for it by continuously evolving, staying attuned to the needs of their communities, and adapting library services, library spaces, and content to these changes. If libraries do that, they will be poised for ongoing future success, and I have every confidence that the library field will continue to evolve and be successful for many years to come. It has been my pleasure to speak with you today in this video presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, I know that you will agree with me that that was interesting and thought-provoking, and we do in Palo Alto employ a number of graduates of San Jose State. So we're very happy that they're involved and that Sandy remains involved. Our next speaker will be, actually, I do want to mention, if you have questions for Sandy, I can get you in touch with her, and you'll be able to get feedback and get a response from her as soon as she's back. Now, I'd like to introduce Miguel Figueroa. He works at the Center for the Future of Libraries, an initiative from the American Library Association. He has previously held positions at the American Theological Library Association, ALA's Office for Diversity, and Office for Literacy and Outreach Services, at NYU's Urban Medical Library, and at Neil Schumann Publishers. He is a graduate of the University of Arizona's Knowledge River program, an initiative that examines library issues from Hispanic and Native American perspectives.
I always say, don't applaud yet. You don't know. Go a lot of ways. All right. So before I do anything, let me just say, so I work at ALA in Chicago, and I get to visit a lot of libraries. And I was telling Doug earlier, you all have a very enviable library. I'm very excited to be here because I consistently hear great things about this library, and certainly great things from what Monique shares. So the Advisory Commission, you're doing some great advising. The advocates, you're doing some great advocacy, and certainly the staff at this library are doing some wonderful work. Tonight I'm kind of playing middle child, I guess, in between the bright shining stars that are Sandy Hirsch and Dan Russell, so we'll see how it goes. I'm gonna do something a little weird, I guess. Time and again, when we ask people about libraries, the first thing that comes to mind for them is books. And it's a brand recognition that I think most other companies would envy. We have such penetration around this concept of books. The interesting thing is that when a lot of our libraries go out and talk to their communities about the future of the library, that book idea continues to dominate. People will say, what they really want for the future of libraries is more books, more of the bestsellers and the romance novels that I love so much. Or they'll say, do we still need books when we ask them about the future? Or they'll say, oh, I really hope you don't get rid of the books. I love all the shelves and everything. And so there's that surface level understanding of libraries as books. If we're really lucky though, and on a really good day, I think people will say, we're actually about reading. And we're actually about literacy, and books are just a part of that idea of reading and literacy. And more people know that the entry points for understanding happen not just for understanding text, but for understanding media, for understanding technology, for understanding health, for understanding government and finances, and any one of a number of other opportunities comes in with this very complex understanding of literacy and that foundational entry point of textual reading, but then all the expanding options that we have that are fundamentally facilitated by libraries. And so the future of libraries is in helping people make sense of those new literacies and to understand all of the things that they can do. And then on really, really good days, the people who love and champion libraries know that ultimately what we've evolved into is to be part of a really rich information environment. That we're actually about information consumption, which has always happened through books and other content, but increasingly we're about information production through different technological tools, that we have all of these opportunities to bring lots of sources together and not just walk away with new knowledge, but to actually contribute to the knowledge base through the new production of something. And through that knowledge production, we're also all about information sharing. We're about contributing to our communities, to the world in very rich and different ways. And so the future of libraries is about all the things you can do with information, not just about the information itself. The weird thing is that I think if you ask library professionals, those people who work in libraries and those people who are degreed in librarianship, they'll tell you that libraries are really about a complex set of values. Professional values that we are kind of taught and trained within, but also the values that we know that we provide to our communities. And those values range from everything from access and discovery and creation and expression, and certainly intellectual freedom and literacy, but also the fundamental contribution to ideas about the civic commons and supporting democracy enhancing diversity and understanding across different people, contributing to a sense of place, facilitating a public discourse, preserving the human record in all of its different forms, and even in difficult times like this, creating a real point of trust in community, somewhere that people can go that they know that there's some amount of authority and that there's a validation of facts and what is actually true. And it's those values that I think whenever we talk about the future of libraries, I think it's really important that we focus on understanding those values and realizing that our future is built on these, that these values have guided us through many futures and many more futures that will come. No matter what the level of change is that happens, we have these values and we need to stay focused on these. One of the things, though, when we talk about values, I immediately move to this idea, and this is Charles Landry. He's an urbanist who studies lots of different cities. And he says that the best cities start with values about what is important to them in the longer term. The best cities that we can live in, if we really think about them, they're rooted in a fundamental value. And he says that on this basis, they establish principles they are truly committed to that guide their actions. They can't be too obvious, though. Statements no one would disagree with gain little traction. The wish needs a compelling narrative attached to it. And I think that that's absolutely true for the libraries that are building really robust futures. I think about in Chicago, the Chicago Public Library has invested a lot in this idea that every individual can contribute and create new media and content from wherever they are. And so they've created a U-Media program that where originally young people could go in and remix different content and produce everything from a superstar like Chance the Rapper to individuals who just came in and did 3D printing and learned new STEM and STEAM activities. I think of places like the Fayetteville Free Library in upstate New York, a single outpost library that has committed itself to the idea that the library should be a platform for peer-to-peer learning among community members, wherein any member of the community can come in and say, I have something that I can teach other people, and the library will facilitate an audience so that that individual has a group to learn with and grow and develop. Or I think about the Cleveland Public Library that's realigned itself and said that it will fundamentally be a people's university. And so their continuing mission is to try and provide that level of education from birth to the oldest adults in the community. They're attaching themselves to real ideas about place or discovery or creation and expression or trust. And you know, as I was just talking to Monique, she so eloquently put, she said, you know, that this library is a real salon for curious people, for them to come together and to build an even smarter community than what they had in the individual parts. And that's such a clear articulation of values that will withstand any test of time. Through this process, I think what we start to realize is that the really great libraries are the ones who understand that we live in a world of inbound change, lots of changes that are happening from lots of different directions, from new changes in technology to demographic changes to changes in the way that our users behave, changes in our environment, certainly changes in our political system. They look across all of these levels of inbound change. And then what the best libraries do is they think about those values that the profession has and try to filter those changes through the values so that ultimately what they can produce is an outbound change. The change that the library produces itself and with the community that it serves. And it says that we can look at all of these changes and provide meaning and enhancement and new value that will fundamentally be recognized by our community and those people that we serve. I'm going to steal something from a place that perhaps is unexpected, but every time I read it, I'm really interested in it, and I think it tells us a lot about the future of libraries. This is a quote. It's kind of the manifesto, I guess, for a firm called Skift. Skift is a travel and research firm. They do market analysis for everything from online travel agencies like Expedia and other sources to what airlines are doing to what hotels are doing. Wherever they put travel, I just subbed in the word libraries, and I think it resonates. Still true, probably for our profession or for any industry. But they say that being fanatically focused on the changing consumer behaviors across all sectors, not just libraries, whether because of globalization, digital tools, or other generational factors. They say that the future of libraries will be defined by leaders who understand the larger context in which libraries operate, not by navel-gazing. And so the really future-focused libraries are the ones that monitor trends and changes and think about them and say, how do we bring that into our library context? You know, we have a lot of libraries that got interested in 3D printing a while ago, and so everybody kind of ran out and bought 3D printers for their libraries. And I know for some patrons, they looked at this and they said, that's not what libraries are about. And there was this unique divide between the libraries that got it and the libraries that maybe didn't. Because some libraries just bought the 3D printer and put it in a corner of the room and said, that's it. And then the really good libraries were the ones that took the 3D printer and they said, this has something to do with access. This has something to do with creation and expression. It has something to do with learning and discovery. And they found all the new ways to connect that new piece of technology, that emerging trend or change, into what libraries have always done. And they facilitated that connection in with all of the books and the databases and the story times and everything else. And they said, this is just a new component of what we've always done. And they built that level of relevance. And we can see this again and again in the examples that Sandy shared about drones and maker programs or robots or anything else that we see in libraries. The future isn't something that we're ultimately going to discover. It's something that unravels with all the trends and changes that we build into it. And so I think that this library and so many other libraries can do these things fundamentally because we have a profession and trained professionals who know how to adapt these values, and we certainly have community partners and champions who know the ideas to bring to us for us to think with them about how we adapt them for the future. So I look forward to chatting during the question and answer period and the discussion, but I hope that framing it in that way helps us think about libraries of the future in a different way. Thank you.
All right, we are going to make a little swap. And then I will introduce, nope. How about I introduce while you swap? Okay. Thank you.
I'll take that off your hands.
Take that off my hands. And I will do a little bit of this. That's great. So next up, Dan Russell. Dan is also a Palo Alto resident. Yay, lucky us. But he is Google's Uber tech lead for search quality and user happiness in Mountain View. I want to be in charge of someone's happiness. That would be great. He earned his PhD in computer science, specializing in artificial intelligence, until he realized that amplifying human intelligence was his real passion. His day job is understanding how people search for information broadly, including research in libraries, and the ways they come to learn about the world through online information resources. His 20% job is teaching the world to search more effectively. His MOOC, PowerSearchingWithGoogle.com, is currently hosting 3,000 learners per week in the course. In the past 3 years, over 3.5 million students have attended his online search classes. And at this rate, during 2017, students taking the online course will have engaged in over 200 years of learning. Dan enjoys teaching, learning, running, and music, preferably all in one day. So please join me in welcoming Dan Russell.
Thank you. So I am interested in the future of libraries, and I'm interested really in the future of you and information and how you get to that stuff. Is this not? Yeah.
Okay, got it.
See, I have a little green dot there.
Then I'll turn mine on.
Okay, great. So I think it's useful to sort of frame the conversation about the future of libraries by looking at libraries in the past, just so we can get a kind of couple points on the graph here. I work at Google. You have to expect this. So if you think about libraries, classically, they contain things, and those things are containers of information, and librarians are the stewards of that. And they're more than that. They are actually the intercessors for us so we can understand these beautiful, oh, these are scrolls. Forget it. It's old technology, right? And they're a real pain to use. You ever try to get to the very end of the page of a scroll? Yeah, it's a major pain. My point is that libraries, classical libraries, are collections classically of codices or scrolls or whatever the current technology is. And what a library is more than just a house for crushed trees with ink. They're more than just a house for little pieces of silicon and maybe pieces of polycarbonate. They're more than just a house for whatever the current incarnation of technology is. It used to be microfiche. Anybody remember microfiche? Yeah, that's gone, right? Okay, but there still exists in some archives, but we still need to know what a microfiche is and why it's important. We build these beautiful structures that are sort of icons to knowledge, icons to learning, icons to understanding. So this is the library at UC San Diego, and I was just teaching there last week. The striking thing about these libraries is there's the physical incarnation of it, there's the building, there's the stuff in it, there's the capital expenses, but it's the people, it's the knowledge, it's the social relationships that really matter. So I like what Miguel just was saying, right? It's this context, it's this community that really matters, those values that emerge from the library. So from my perspective, and I work at Google, libraries are still working kind of well. If you've been to the Mitchell Park Library on an average day, they're really busy, really busy. I sat out at the coffee shop there, and every 30 seconds, the entire 4 hours I was sitting there, somebody was going in and out that door. That's a remarkable testament to the value of a public library. And the Pew Research Center has published this result recently, which is over the past several years, it's been kind of steady state, right? Quite good. Even millennials, right? You know those folks, those children, right? They're beating everybody in this audience in terms of their library visits and their library use. So this is a remarkable thing. They're visiting the library websites as well. So the thing that's interesting about this is that books are continuing to be published, newspapers continue to be published. Some things go up, some things go down, but it's still a great environment. It's not boom times for publishing in traditional media, but hang on to that thought. Because it's boom times for every other kind of media in the world. And what are libraries? Librarians, intercessors, understanding, community, knowledge. So we can see what the trend lines here are. Magazines, you don't want to be in the magazine business right now. But newspapers, maybe you don't want to be in that business either, but books are still a place, right? So I started to put together a list of kind of genres of things that we now deal with on a sort of day-to-day basis. And this is a fool's errand, right? If you think about what goes in a library, what people actually use for their information needs, there are home pages and bookmarks and online surveys and animation sites and all this stuff. My key point here is that this stuff, all these things, are what people deal with day to day. And librarians and libraries help our patrons, help us negotiate and navigate and understand this welter of content. So for example, you don't think of YouTube as being part of the library's function. Trust me, have you been to the library recently? It totally is part of the library's function. Now, what I'd love to see is students understanding YouTube videos more deeply. But this is a bang up environment, right? Every minute of every day, 200 hours of video are being uploaded to YouTube, right? Some of those are funny cat videos, right? But suppose 1% of them are surgery procedure videos. That means how many hours, right? 2 hours per minute are being uploaded. See where I'm going with this? This is a profoundly new information space. Libraries, librarians, this ecosystem that we have here are really critical, providing informed, deeply thinking citizens who can actually understand and grapple with this. Now think about, though, the space of which things are out there. We typically think of research libraries and research librarians as dealing with scholarly papers, right? So right now we know that there are roughly 1.8 million papers being produced every year in roughly 28,000 journals. But some of them are like that. I'm not going to read that aloud. You can read it off the screen. The point is, we have to help our patrons, our students, ourselves, understand what's good quality information and what's crap, basically. How do we do that? We need to think about what libraries provide as a critical function in the ecology and the consciousness of our community. and of ourselves, of an informed citizenry. So where's all this going? I want you to think about media in a slightly different way, because media is changing in really interesting, deep ways. For example, these folks at the University of Washington at Google figured out a way to actually crawl through all the images on the internet. And you know how many people have gone up to Lombard Street and taken the same photograph? All of you, but at different times. And so they figured out what they could do is actually put them all together and string them into a sequence of time-lapse imagery. The thing here is no one person took this video. This is a synthesized video from all of your public domain images. Okay, I'm a librarian. I'm cataloging this. Who's the author? Big trouble, right? Do you see what's going on? Media is qualitatively shifting underneath us. We have all kinds of interesting things like virtual reality or augmented reality. We have all these new kinds of media types. So this is an image from Google Street View of a place in Iran, right? This is accessible through the library computers. This is Street View. So at one point in time, the Google Street View car drove past the front of the library and took this image. Again, accessible to you. Why am I telling you this? Because if you know these different kinds of media are out there, you can then use them to answer questions. And this is, I think, one of the critical functions, again, of a library, is teaching us all, teaching students, teaching patrons, how to reason, how to think, how to analyze content like that that's available through the library. So we have cars that do that, we have bikes that do that, we have all these different ways of getting user contributions, and sometimes birds contribute to Street View in ways we hadn't anticipated. Here's an interesting thing to think about. This is a Street View image. Is it real? We live in an era of fake news and an increasingly skeptical audience. You think, that's actually a really nice picture of the night sky, but it's photo augmented. That is, somebody actually took a very long time lapse and inserted it into the Street View. It's real, but it's not true in some sense. This becomes an interesting issue because in the world of the future library, we have to think about teaching ourselves these critical assessment skills. So what does the future library do? One of the things they do, I think, is help us to understand these things. So let me tell you a story. The future through the past. You know about Galileo, invented this telescope, 1640, and through that telescope, he could see Saturn. This is one of his original publications. You see the kind of figure 8 things? He was convinced Saturn was like a sphere with cup handles stuck on the side. And he drew that in his manuscript. And in the 17th century, he was right. That was the best resolution. That's what it looked like through his telescope. And you could see, it's a sphere with cup handles on it, right? Like a mug. But of course, a little bit later, Christian Huygens came along with a better telescope and took a look through his improved telescope and was able to see that it actually looks like that. That there was a ring of material around the outside. Why am I telling you this? Galileo published fake news, right? Or rather, his news was just out of date. He didn't have the limits of his telescope was not that great. But what's even more interesting to us in this conversation is that's actually not a picture of Saturn. That's a computer graphic model of Saturn, and you couldn't tell. I've got a lot of examples like this, including pictures of people that you cannot tell have been hacked, have been photoshopped, have been changed. This is a real picture of Saturn, but again, what's real here? Because this is what it looks like without color correction. See where I'm going with this? Even something like the difference between the color-corrected version and the uncolor-corrected version looks very, very different. Our understanding of Saturn changes with technology, with our information that's available to us. So this beautiful image is in fact an artifact of our technology. So what's real? With great power, with great knowledge, with great libraries comes great responsibility to help everyone understand what's possible, what we can understand, and what we need to get at. So in the context of the library, we have, in Google Books, the ability to, for example, look for a book like this. You just do a search, and you see that thing that says Find in a Library. You can click on that, and one way you can get that is to actually print the document. For about $8, you can get a copy of Galileo's original writing. Or you can click on that link I showed you, and it takes you to OCLC's WorldCat catalog of multiple libraries worldwide. Why am I telling you this? Because it allows you, the patron, to do a remarkable thing. You can find a book like the book by Sal Jorgensen on sharks, and I can say, great, let's take me to Google Books. I can read part of it there, but if I click on Find in a Library, it takes me to WorldCat, and if you scroll down a little bit, because I've already told it my zip code, see, it tells me it's in the Palo Alto Library. The next closest copy is at the Stanford Library. And it's making this connection between the online and the physical. Just as you can print that book, you can also find it in the Palo Alto Library. Of course, this doesn't work because Palo Alto doesn't contain the Neue Systematisches Koebnet Vorgesetzt durch, right? We don't have that book. But you can use the same trick. You look at it on Google Online, or you can go and find that the closest copy is at Claremont Colleges. This is an interesting point. We're seeing this blending, this merger of the physical and the virtual, of the augmented with the simple text. So all of a sudden, what I think libraries are about, and what I think the future of libraries are about, it's about, sure, it's about books, it's about magazines, it's about virtual reality, it's about augmented whatever, but it's also about teaching. It's about building a community of people who are informed, who understand. So this is one of my fellow Googlers teaching a basic search class at Mitchell Park in Chinese. We've run classes in Spanish and Russian and English. We're trying to help with the outreach part of this process. This is a bookmobile, no surprise. It is interesting, it's at Google. You might have thought Googlers don't read books. You would be completely wrong in that. This comes to Google twice a week to 3 different locations on campus. So we see this, that I think in summary here, the future is, as Miguel points out, there's going to be this set of changes, and yet changes are sort of inevitable. But the changes, I think, are for the positive. Because I think in some sense, we always worry about acquiring technology, but we're sort of over the expensive part of the technology hump, right? To get a virtual reality headset, it's a little bit of money, but it's nothing like computers were 20 years ago. Remember those? They were real money. All of a sudden now, I think we're in an era when community, both in terms of teaching and providing social spaces and maker spaces and so on, is a really important function of the library. Technology, yeah, we need some. But the library of 2037 is going to look a lot like the library of 2017. Different stuff inside, same people, same interests, same librarians, same sense of community, the same sense that we need to understand information in the large and what we can do with it. Thank you.
All right. Well, next we're going to bring out some chairs, and we are going to bring out Gennady, and we're going to bring back our 2 speakers. So while they're doing that, I'll introduce Gennady. Our moderator tonight for the Q&A part of the program is Gennady Shiner, who's been covering City Hall for the Palo Alto Weekly since 2008. The first election he covered in Palo Alto was the passage of Measure N to rebuild the city's libraries. Before that, he had spent 3 years covering crime and politics for the Waterbury Republican American, a daily paper in Connecticut. And so the plan tonight is that he will begin, he has some questions for our speakers. And then as there's time, he'll take some questions from the audience. And I will hand this over to Gennady.
Great. Thank you, Monique, and thanks everybody for being here. Really great seeing you all.
Outside, inside. I'll take please. It's musical chairs a little bit, just to start.
And of course, thank you to Miguel and Dan for the great presentations. I'm going to ask each of you some questions, but I think I want to keep it pretty informal, so if I ask someone a question, we should both feel free to jump in and just kind of keep the conversation going. My first question... Okay. My first question for Miguel, you gave us some examples of libraries kind of tailoring their personality to the community almost. Chicago, Cleveland, the University for All model, Fayetteville. I'm curious, how does this process take place? Is this like a top-down thing that like the council or the mayor decide this is what our community is like and proceed accordingly? Is it something that bubbles up from the grassroots? Is it a combination of both? How do Cleveland and Fayetteville and Chance the Rapper in Chicago get to where they are today?
I think that's one of the big things that's happening for libraries right now is that for libraries, but also for a lot of other institutions, there was this idea of how does the user fit into the life of the library? And so we built so many structures and systems, banks, libraries, anything else, and we said, we have a model here, we're gonna run our system the way we wanna run it, and you're gonna fit into it the way that we tell you. And I think the big change that's starting to happen, and in those models, it was the mayor or board of trustees or the library or the advisory commission that would tell people this is what the library will be. And instead, I think we're starting to see a shift where it's much more, how does the library fit into the life of the user? So how do we make ourselves relevant to what people want to do? And so we're starting to see more libraries move towards a community conversation model or becoming deeply in depth with the research and understanding of what users are actually wanting. What are the aspirations of the community? How do we unearth those and understand those? And then how do we build a system that works for what our community is telling us?
And Dan, I think before this event, I kind of, well, actually, when I started working in Palo Alto, I was a little surprised that Measure N is even happening because you hear all these doomsday stories about libraries and newspapers, my industry, kind of. But the fact that we have a Google scientist here who worked on Measure N kind of gives me a lot of hope. And I wanted to ask you basically, you mentioned the words fake news, which have been in the real news a lot lately, and Google for us has become kind of like a go-to source for almost all our search needs, but I think last week it kind of got at the news for the wrong reasons because some algorithm let a 4chan story in. I'm curious, do you see a need in today's digital era for curators, either in the private or public sectors, to serve the role of librarians that you so eloquently explained in physical libraries, to kind of help us navigate between what's real and what isn't?
Wow, that's multiple questions, but they're all free. So sure, I think curation is a fundamental property of all libraries. And good libraries, I think as Miguel points out, curate with respect to the community. They are aware of the user needs, they're aware of what the community is looking for and so on. And so it would be a real mistake to have a library here in Palo Alto which is 100% Latvian. I mean, there are a couple Latvian readers, but not a lot. And so you have to not only tailor the language, but also the topics, the interests. But I think the real point you're getting at is librarians and staff are marvelous curators, not just because they tailor the collection to the community, but also they help patrons understand what's possible. And by making these connections. So for example, here, patron, why don't you try this resource? Why don't you try this database? Why don't you try that approach? Algorithmic curation is a little bit harder, and in particular, fake news is devilishly difficult to curate algorithmically. I think we're all making progress there, but I think it's still at the point where human intervention is often a really good thing. So the big problem for us, and I think for all of us, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, so on, is that we operate at such scale that you can't really have a human actually looking at every single little thing. Consider that Google works worldwide, and we publish news in lots and lots of those different countries, and so the vast majority of that has to be algorithmic. So it's getting better. It's not getting better fast enough, but that's why I have a job.
I should point out that errors in journalism or in news aren't limited to Google or any digital platform. Magazines and newspapers do that too, just singling out a recent example. But you guys both touched upon the role of libraries as centers for social interaction. They're kind of the role to foster community. How do you think that role has changed over the last, say, decade with the rise of social media and the idea that even the idea of a community isn't what it was a while ago? I mean, you have Facebook groups, Facebook friends, people don't really need to leave the house to interact as much. How does a city library fit into the new model? And maybe Miguel could start.
They don't need to interact as much, but they want to interact as much. I think when you were talking about the physical, digital, I think that's going to be a movement across lots of industries. We're increasingly moving towards this phygital idea that we want a certain amount of connection, even though we will also appreciate the convenience of digital technology and other types of things. But, you know, the truly connecting elements of libraries endure with us. If you talk about public libraries, people will inevitably talk about story time. It is such a resonant experience for all of our lives that we got to connect with someone. And not just connect with it on an individual level, but connect across a community, because everyone shows up at story time. No matter what your background is, everybody knows to bring their kids to story time. And the other one is summer reading, summer learning. Every kid in a community gets signed up for summer learning, no matter what their background is, no matter if their kids have a college degree or don't have one. And that's about human connection. So I think those are going to remain so important, and we need to find more opportunities to bring different types of people together, like story time or summer learning or book clubs do.
That's a good point. I think one of the things that libraries have done over the past, say, 20 years has been to recognize that the aspect of the community is really important. It's kind of not optional, right? So, for example, in the recent renovation in Palo Alto, a lot of the libraries got meeting rooms that you can schedule. And I see them being used a lot. They're a fantastic thing that just wasn't a big deal in libraries, say, 50 years ago. So it's an adaptation that the libraries have made, recognizing that this community aspect is really important for students and so on. The other thing, just in the larger sense about connections and communities, is that if you would have asked me 30 years ago whether or not people would be meeting online and, for example, getting in cars with strangers and accepting rides from them, now it's a business model. You know, it's a very different kind of world. And so I was very surprised the very first time I ran a meetup. So a meetup is one of these online mechanisms you can go and say, I'm going to be at this pub in downtown Washington, D.C. on this date. People on my blog, if you want to come, and 20 people showed up. I'd never met any of these people physically before, but knowing them in some sense online allowed me to have that kind of connection. That's the kind of thing you can do in libraries really easily now. It was tough before.
Great. And Dan alluded to his blog, and I should just point out, I spent a few hours yesterday on search research, and
A few hours? Oh, man. I'm
sorry. You can get lost in it. I've done
these
it.
posts drag you in. He's like the Will Shortz of Google. It's like, if you think Google searching is just put in a word and look for results, it's going to blow your mind. Anyway, free plug there. But I wanted to ask, on the whole searching aspect, right now it's so easy to get kind of basic information. You know, I'm watching Game of Thrones, I see a familiar actor, I want to know, where did I see this person at? I go to IMDb, I find his name, I search, all that stuff. Does anything get lost in the process with having so much information being so easily available, both in terms of concentration and in terms of going through the journey of finding an answer? The fact that years ago we had to, you know, dig through books and talk to people, whereas now we don't have to. It seems like there's enormous advantages to that, but I'm curious whether you see any disadvantages.
Well, it's a great question, because if you remember, say, pre-Google, what that was like, you'd be asked that same question. Who was that actor? And you go, damn. And that'd be the end of it, right? You were done at that point.
Go back to concentrating on the show.
Exactly, you go back to watch the show or something. But then things like Lost happened, the TV series Lost, and the Lostpedia project came up, which then provides a huge amount of backstory. And so in some sense, that's a new media kind. There's a TV series, but there's also a whole backing story and theories and data and introductions to various speculations and so on. So this is really interesting. So I don't think we're losing something. We are creating a new kind of thing, with the Lostpedias or with the Star Trek fan fiction and so on and so on. Those are in fact creating new kinds of communities that didn't exist before.
I think one of the interesting things, though, that has started to happen is that we started to confuse convenience in search for authority and trust in search. And so I don't I don't want to talk about fake news because I don't think it's the news's problem. I think it's our confusion that we provide the authority of Facebook or Google onto the information that is contained within it. And we don't recognize that those are two different things, that the platform doesn't stand behind all of the information that is within it. And we need to look a little bit more deeply. And sometimes the convenience factor happens. I think a lot about the voice-controlled devices now, and I worry that people aren't going to do the extra layer to understand, well, when I ask a question, where is this voice assistant actually getting that information from? Who's the search result authority behind all of the results that come back from voice search? And that's a point where we've confused the convenience of voice search with authority to that. And I don't know that people are learning how to do the inquiry behind it. I think that was fundamental to your presentation, is it's about knowing how do we understand the results that come back from our search and evaluate those.
So I think that's a really interesting point, that the ease and rapidity with which a result comes back is not the same as authority.
Correct.
Right? And let me ask you a question. Sorry, I got to ask. Do you think that we will, as a culture, learn that distinction?
I don't know that a lot of us want to learn that distinction. I think that's where I get a lot of hope from libraries that spend a little bit more time talking to their users and engaging with these products. You know, one of the things that I do in my regular work is talk about trends like voice assistance and voice control and say, okay, punch at it, librarians, and they ask all of the right questions about these. Right. And the thing that I hope is that they then translate that level of inquiry back out to their users, and when they do instruction sessions or community dialogues, that they bring up all of these issues with that. So I think I think it can happen. Yeah. I don't think on our own we would do that.
We need to make it happen.
Well, we need people who are passionate about this, people who think about it at a deep level, like you, like librarians, like lots of people. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to add my 5 cents to this last question, I feel like a few days ago, the Weekly was covering a story about another Caltrain collision, which Caltrain hit a car. There were no fatalities, but it turns out that it was the GPS with an authoritative, easy-to-follow voice that led the car into the tracks where it got stuck, and thankfully the passenger was pulled out. So it just goes to the point. I think experience will teach us to maybe trust easy-to-access voices a little bit less, and maybe trust librarians a little more, which brings me to the next question. I feel like your presentation, both of your presentations, and Sandra's as well, puts a lot of onus on librarians to kind of navigate this new world in which information is so plentiful. And I imagine that, like in many other industries, you've had librarians who've been, doing things a certain way for decades, going back to the Dewey Decimal System and all that kind of stuff. Do you think today's librarians are equipped to deal with so much new information and so many new technologies coming at them? And what could we as a society, as cities, do to to make sure that libraries could serve as this kind of gatekeeper between the superfluous and the real?
So I wouldn't say onus, I would say opportunity.
The honor.
Right? Exactly. And I'm, even though that's sort of flipped, I'm sort of serious about that as well, because I know this, I actually am connected with a bunch of different information schools, and I know the students coming out of those places are incredibly well-versed in traditional library science, but also in new technology stuff. So I have no concern about that. Every institution has to go through a certain amount of change over time, and you have to adapt and so on. But I do think you put your finger right on something important, which is this kind of stuff, this looking deeper, this sort of validation, this checking for credibility, is not a natural thing. You do not learn this at mother's knee. You have to learn it somewhere. And I think our schools are not doing a great job of teaching this. And it's got to be as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. It should also be the research skills you need in order to be able to function effectively in our society. So I think it is an opportunity, and it's really up for librarians to seize this, make it happen.
Great. And Miguel, do you
And I
have
think library professionals are also realizing that we can't solve the problem together, so we need to work with educators, we need to work with technology folks, and be open to the idea of bringing them into the conversation and letting them use the space, a trusted space like a library, to have a platform to raise awareness. You know, I love seeing a picture of someone teaching in Chinese that she's not a librarian, right?
Right.
But she's been provided that space to do those things. I think that's a really important. We bring in social workers, we bring in lots of other skilled disciplines to create greater knowledge in our communities. Originally we brought in lots of books, now we're bringing in lots of different types of people and providing them that space.
And I think Monique gave me till about 8, so I was wondering if anybody in the audience would like to ask some questions of our great speakers.
We have a few. Okay, great. So I'm going to be Phil Donahue and come around.
Hi, my name is Tamika Price. I actually have a question. I am a librarian with the San Jose Public Library. But as you all are talking about digging deeper, as a librarian, we encounter, I guess, the resistance of trying to get people to think deeper, to look deeper. An example would be for me, I have 2 different friends groups, and one of the reasons why I'm a librarian is because I love to share out information, hoping that it would help inspire people to want to learn more. But you have groups of people here that they only want the minimal information to keep moving. And then you have another group of people here where I just need, give me more details, give me more information so I can get to where I'm making a decision that I feel comfortable with. So as a librarian, I think we don't think about that a lot, or we don't come up with ways of maybe informing the communities in ways where it does give them more information and maybe some sort of way get them to want to search deeper. So my question actually has to do with, do you have some thoughts on that? Do you have some ways, you being from Google and as well as Figueroa being from ALA? I would love to hear more about that.
Well, I teach a lot of classes each year, and a lot of classes are exactly on this topic. You know, how do I help you do a better search? And I think your observation is actually right. There are people who just tell me the answer, right? 42, we're done, right? And then there are the people who want to know, how did you do that? And there's another set of people which is, well, why is it 42? What conditions would that not be, and so on, right? And I think part of my job as a teacher, and I think part of a librarian's job, is to sort of help them understand that there's usually a story behind that. So I find myself often doing sort of guerrilla teaching. I'm trying to actually slip in a little bit of my ethos about that, right? Well, the number is 42, but the reason it is 42 is because, so I do, run-on sentences like that in order to help them see that there's more than that. Or, pragmatically speaking, I will say, it's 42, but only on Earth, at which point they should say, it's not 42 somewhere else? And I say, yeah, on Mars it's 43. And then you have an opening for a conversation, right? So you have to be a little bit of a Phil Donahue, right? I'm trying to give you that leading question, leading thought.
And I also wonder, sometimes I think, I'm a librarian as well, so I think this way as well sometimes, is that we believe in an absolute best answer, but sometimes we don't understand the true nature of what the individual is asking or the question that they're pursuing. One of the observations that's brought up to me again and again is younger people's use of YouTube as a how-to guide, that has become the default how-to for lots of different, from everything from plumbing and home repair to cooking meals and other types of things, and trying to understand, well, what are they actually accomplishing through this YouTube, and what's the validity of YouTube, and what are the attributes of YouTube as an information source that are resonating with what they're really trying to achieve. And clearly they're displaying a penchant for visual learning, perhaps over text-based learning, a convenience factor, an ability to evaluate all the comments and likes that things have brought in, and how do we make sense of that and start to understand, well, what's the true nature of their question that they're pursuing? Not what's our idea of the best answer to a question that perhaps they haven't fully expressed and realized.
Okay, another question?
Hi. I see a fundamental conflict showing up in a lot of what was being said about the purposes of things. On the one hand, there is the idea of taking these new technologies and integrating them into the already established and time-based purposes of libraries. You gave a good example when you were talking about the 3D printers, about how you're using that as an information and educational tool the way that everything else in libraries is used that. On the other hand, however, I also saw, and this was particularly so in that of the first speaker, the one who is in Japan, but also in some of what you other two were saying, about libraries fundamentally changing. For instance, the first speaker had that little chart about how it's changing from physical to virtual and how it's changing from individual to community. Now, you brought up the community thing, but you said that there's always been that aspect of the libraries. You gave the example of story time. Nevertheless, at least she saw it, and the authority that she was quoting saw it as a fundamental change in the purpose of libraries. So I'm seeing the question is, to what degree is the changes that we're going through a matter of integrating things into libraries having the same fundamental purpose, regardless of all the changes that are being made, and how much is it a matter of libraries changing into a different kind of thing than they had been, regardless, again, of the media. There was you were talking about, I'm sorry, I don't remember either of your names. You were talking about the idea of the library as a container of information, regardless of whether it's scrolls or books or pixels or whatever. So that's not the relevant question. The question is about the purpose and use of whatever it is that you're doing, regardless of what the technology or form is.
So I was kind of intrigued by Sandy's first slide, the dichotomy between the physical and the virtual, the individual and the community. And I was kind of initially worried about it until she clarified and she said that we'll find ourselves on the continuum between those two, that we're somewhere in the middle of those. And I think that's especially true in the physical virtual element. I don't think anyone wants to be, in current day and likely in the future, I don't think any library wants to be exclusively on one quadrant or the other. We want to be somewhere in between, accommodating changing needs and technologies that bring together a past and tradition with a new and emerging and cutting edge and unfolding area. The thing that I would say about the inclusion of trends and changes is that really good libraries only pick up the trends and changes that make sense for the values that we have and for the wants and needs of our community. And even if the community says the library should be nothing but movies, for instance, if all they want is a film library, I think somewhere there's going to be a discussion with the librarians that say that's really not our mission, isn't just strictly entertainment or pleasure or this or that. We have an educational function. You have to balance it somewhere within that so that it's not one end or the other, that it creates a sort of happier medium, I think, between them.
That last question relates to the first question that the interviewer asked, which is about how these priorities are established. And you can go out and ask, all the users, what do you want? And they'll just say any old thing. Yeah. I just got an interview in which I was asked a whole bunch of detailed questions about a bond issue for a community college district, and I don't really know. I mean, I had to say yes or no, or how highly I rated these things, and I just had to guess. You don't necessarily get authoritative answers that way, although some people like to pretend that you do. And also, I like your reading of the first slide, but that's not the way that I gather what she was saying. She was saying that we're evolving from this to that, and right now we're in between, but we're going to be over at the other end. I hope I was misinterpreting it, but that's what I thought she was saying.
I thought that's where it was going, but I heard her clarify that we'll be somewhere in between. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
All right, how about one more question, and then we'll turn it back to Gennady to wrap it up.
Okay, I just talk. My concern is about the portion of a library's collection that is supposed to be factual information as opposed to fiction or poetry. In the past, I'm sure libraries vetted what they bought for their collections in the sciences and et cetera and so forth. And they dealt with reputable publishers. But you're absolutely right. In the world of today and tomorrow, a tremendous amount of information is conveyed electronically. And as you alluded in your talks, not all that information is valid. What is going to be the obligation of libraries to vet this information in the future?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Vet digital information or published print information?
The library is going to be a conduit for digital information.
Okay.
What is the obligation of the library to make sure that it is conveying factual information?
Well, I have a take on this, which may clarify things. What's factual? The reason I put a rhetorical question like that is our understanding of things changes over time. This is what science is all about. So as a practicing scientist, for example, many years ago, I studied immunology. Everything I learned about immunology back in the 1970s is wrong. It is utterly wrong. I got it out of a textbook that was vetted by the best authorities in the field. Medical science has moved forward. Okay, so we can do what we can to try to vet these things, to try to make this is an authoritative thing. But you know, there are just some things that are very, very difficult. In your lifetime, is cholesterol good or bad? Should you eat butter or not? You know that at one point smoking was considered good for you. 9 out of 10 doctors recommended it, right? So it's one of these things where our understanding it changes over time. If it doesn't, we're in big trouble, right? And I think that's actually a bigger problem than whether or not you vet this stuff. I do think you should keep your textbooks and your reference documents and so on up to date. So, for example, if you've got the handbook for nutritional guidelines from 1950, dump it. It's no good anymore, right? So I think it's one of these things we have to understand that these are not sacred texts which are written out completely true and perfectly. We are always, as a scientific community, as a knowledge community, trying to make this stuff better and better.
And I think for a lot of libraries, it's moved towards helping people prioritize certain sources of information as more authoritative than others. And so it's not in our interest to go through and index all of the digital sources of information. It is, in a lot of ways, helpful, and I think part of the science of library science is that we have somewhat of a responsibility to predict some of the needs of users and to curate the best information that helps those users. And that's evolved through different ways, from everything from a bibliography that librarians would produce and say, these are great sources to consult on any one of a number of topics, to pathfinders, to websites that curate that content. And I'm sure at Palo Alto's there are library guides or some other things on relevant topics that come out that point to, these are some of the best sources we know where you can go and get information about health topics, whatever else it is. And that's not to say these are bad topics. That's to say, start your search here. This is the good information that we can do. And so providing that sort of encouragement around those prioritized resources will be an excellent source. And of course, we do consult review sources and consult databases that are produced by reputable publishers and other types of things, and pay attention to those sources of authority that provide that trustworthiness to information.
Great. Well, thank you so much again to both of our speakers. I think we all learned a lot about the future of libraries and the present of libraries. But just to loop back on the whole topic we're here to discuss, which is the library's role in the community, I think it's particularly apt for Palo Alto because, as Monique mentioned, 2008 was my first election here, and it really was the community that basically decided to tax itself during the Great Recession to rebuild the library system. And so I do look forward to seeing how this new library system develops over the next decade, and whether Dan is right, whether it'll be the same exact in 2037 as it is today, or whether it takes on another iteration with technologies that we haven't yet discovered, just like we didn't know 10 years ago what we'll have today. But thank you for caring back then and for being here today, and that's it for us.
Very good. Always nice to see you. Thank you so much.